Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the second session of the APLU Multi-Hazards webinar, 10 years after the Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami, Insights and Perspectives based on Science and Experience. This is the second session of this webinar series, and today's theme is Recovery Lessons, Multi-Stakeholders Perspectives. Today's session is organized by APLU Multi-Hazards Program, Tohoku University, Keio University, and Elsevier. I'm Takako Izumi, Associate Professor of Tohoku University and Program Director of APLU Multi-Hazards Program. I'm the moderator of this session, and the APLU Association of Pacific Rim University is a network of 56 universities in the Pacific Rim from 18 economies. And its international secretariat is based in Hong Kong. And also this session today is operated by the APLU International Secretariat with a great support from them. And under the APLU, the Multi-Hazards Program was established in 2013, jointly by APLU and Tohoku University. And its secretariat is hosted by the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, IRIDIS Tohoku University in Japan. And the program aims for strengthening the collaborative researches and also contributing to international and regional discussions for DR policy making. And the activities of APLU Multi-Hazards Program include the Multi-Hazards Summer School and Annual Symposium, and also the Campus Safety Program. The Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami magnitude of 99.0 earthquake struck the Tohoku region on March 11th in 2011 and claimed more than 20,000 deaths and missing persons. After the 10 years, we see most of the infrastructure recovery has been completed. However, the support to people's lives and livelihoods is still necessary. So today we have speakers from different sectors, such as UNDRI, Keio University, Elsevier Media, and CWS Japan. And they will share their experience at the time of Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami, and what their roles were, and how they got involved in the response and recovery efforts, as well as what would be the messages for the future based on their experience. So let's think about together, what should we pass on from these experiences and messages to the next generation? And how could these experiences, research, and knowledge contribute to reducing the impact and damage caused by such catastrophic disasters in the future? So while you are listening to the presentations, I would like to encourage you to send us questions to each speaker using the Q&A function. So after each presentation, we will have some time for Q&A and discussion. So please don't forget sending your questions. So now I would like to introduce and welcome the first speaker, Dr. Animesh Kumar, Officer in Charge and Deputy Chief of the UNDRR Regional Office for Asia and Pacific based in Bangkok, for his opening remarks. And Dr. Kumar coordinates DR policy and intergovernmental, multi-stakeholder, and the UN mechanisms in the region. And before joining the current position, Dr. Kumar held the same position in the UNDRR Regional Office for Africa in Nairobi. And he has also led risk assessments and profiling in multiple countries and served on various committees, including on science and technology, urban and city resilience, business resilience, etc. And he's a geographer and holds a PhD in adaptation and sustainability. So thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, your participation, and we are very honored to have you. So floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Takako, and a very good morning to everyone from Bangkok. It's a pleasure to be speaking on this very important webinar, and thanks to the organizers and to the fellow panelists for having me to speak in this webinar. The 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, first and foremost, is a moment to remember, as Takako-san just pointed out, to honor the over 18,400 people who lost their lives as a result of this terrible event 10 years ago, and thousands more who were uprooted from their events. It's also an opportunity to remember that the human spirit is resilient, and in few countries in the world have imbibed this spirit as much as the people of Japan. I have been to the Tohoku region quite a few times, including, of course, being part of the World Conference in 2015. But I very fondly remember the visit I made to Sendai, and Takako-san actually took us around to different places in the city. And I very fondly remember visiting the Arahama Elementary School, where I think everybody should visit at least once in their lifetime if they haven't, in terms of if they really want to learn what disaster risk reduction is. Visiting the school has been a lifetime experience. It's a living testimony of resilience and shows how preparedness can and does save lives. In my presentation, and let me start sharing my screen now, I would try to map this growth and changes in thinking in disaster risk reduction over since the Great East Japan earthquake, and show how demonstrate a few practical examples of how things have moved on and how we can move from here in terms of very few practical demonstrations of risk-informed sustainable development, and why and how a multi-stakeholder approach using inclusive approaches is so important. So let me move on and try to give some background information on this. So all of us are very much aware of the Hyogo framework for action, which ran between 2005 and 15, and the Great East Japan earthquake actually happened exactly in between the Hyogo framework implementation period. And we also know that the Hyogo framework process was structured around 5 different priorities for action. And we have been monitoring the progress of countries across the world in terms of what they have done across these different 5 priorities. What we have seen is that most countries did over this 10-year period make a good amount of effort in terms of priority 1 and 5, which is the first one is in ensuring standard governance and institutional arrangements, and the 5th priority on preparedness and response mechanisms. At the same time, we also observed that countries, in terms of addressing the underlying causes of risk, investing in disaster risk reduction, that's the least progress the world made across all the countries in the world. There are some good examples, there are also some good examples, but this is the global picture that we saw over a 10-year duration. So what was the impact of this diversified and disparate investment process across a 10-year duration? Essentially, what happened that the mortality from different disasters has started declining. This is what we are seeing, a trend over the last 30 years now. And the number of persons affected because of disasters has also seen a perceptible decline. At the same time, we see increase in economic losses and infrastructure damage and losses. And if I now look at from the Sendai lens, from the lens of Sendai framework targets, essentially, we are more or less doing well on target A and B, and not so well on targets C and D. And of course, COVID-19 will change this target A and B achievement drastically. We have just been compiling some figures, and the results will be out very soon. And it seems that COVID has already altered this good progress that we made in the last 10 years in terms of declining mortality and affected population. And this is further corroborated by the global figures. We have recently submitted a report to the Secretary General on Sendai Framework implementation. And this is what, there are some percent point figures that we have also quoted there. So I would request or urge everyone to actually look through those reports. So another key trend that we are seeing and now moving towards Asia Pacific is the decelerating or reversing trend in the sustainable development goals. Asia Pacific is not on the right track to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Within these, there are a few SDGs where we are really struggling. And the bad news for all of us is that these are all disaster-related target, including disaster and climate-related figures. And the region is struggling the most on climate action and reducing the human and economic costs of disasters. It is also well known that the risk occurrence in the region in Asia Pacific is not uniform. However, the risk space across the region is increasingly overlapping with multiple dualities. On the one hand, we have vulnerable countries like the 12 LDCs and 15 SIDS, small island states. And on the other, we have around 400 million people living in extreme poverty. These nations and communities are the most vulnerable to disasters. Similarly, on the one hand, several of the LDCs will soon graduate to become mid-income countries. And on the other, around 800 million people, not extremely poor, but still surviving on less than $3.2 a day. Disasters pose challenge to such nations and communities who may be pushed back to lower development levels and extreme poverty as they strive to move up. And all of these gets complicated when they're exposed to hazards of all kinds, especially in the hotspots. And it is in these overlapping layers of different layers of hazards and vulnerabilities that pose grave risks to nations and communities. We know that hazards and hazardous events are dynamic, and we often mistakenly tend to perceive vulnerability as static. However, vulnerability differs over space, time, and context, and hence is equally dynamic. It is defined by physical, social, economic, and environmental multi-dimensions, and shaped by factors like inequality and exclusion. Risk, hence, as we know by now, is systemic. It doesn't operate in isolated corridors, but in a jigsaw puzzle where each block has an implication on the other, as we are seeing in the context of COVID. The 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami served as a stark warning to countries that disaster risks are interconnected and can trigger cascading disasters. It's probably one of the most important lessons from the disaster, and one that we have tried to build on, including through our flagship 2019 Global Assessment Report, which for the first time saw disaster risk from a systemic lens. So to address a systemic risk, we definitely need a systemic approach. So we are propagating this approach through a variety of means, building on the momentum set by the Global Assessment Report of 2019. And I will take 3 examples of how are we doing so: through infrastructure resilience, through nature-based solutions, and through nat at risk. In terms of infrastructure resilience, we are seeing big challenges, more in terms of rapid and unplanned pace of urbanization, but the rapidly changing risk profile because of climate change. We are also seeing high deficit infrastructure financing. We require around $93 trillion to be invested in the next 15 to 20 years, if we really are serious about achieving the SDGs. And on the other hand, we have aging infrastructure, including those in the developed countries. Often we try to look into infrastructure in a very siloed manner as a process of structural growth, but it needs a holistic approach for infrastructure governance, which requires regulation and engagement of professionals and capacity building at all levels. Recognizing these challenges, the Government of India, partnering with the Government of Japan, UK, and a series of other member states and UNDRR, has launched a Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure at the Climate Action Summit in 2019. And as we speak, the International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is ongoing on a virtual way. The additional cost of resilient infrastructure is actually not very high. If you look at the cost of resilience, every $1 investment in resilience on infrastructure could bring back $4 of benefits. Sustained infrastructure services like telecom, power, energy, transport have interconnected nodes and bring societal benefits, including through basic social services like health and education. And in the context of COVID, it does provide opportunities for green growth and reduced carbon emissions. And all of it then boils down to planning and how these can be integrated into national and local DRR strategies, iterative steps that we are taking as we speak in terms of through the Target E of the Sendai framework. Now, nature-based solution is another key mechanism through which we are ensuring risk-informed sustainable development approaches are followed. Drawing from our recent publication launched in December on this topic, we have looked into the role of nature-based solution in reducing disaster risk at multiple levels. We know that disaster risks are not static, as I pointed out earlier, but they are in fact systemic in nature and hence cascading and interconnected impacts, as we are already seeing. But nature-based solution offers a great way of addressing the systemic nature of risk and offers means to stop the flow of risk across sectors and systems, while also reducing disaster impacts and speeding up post-disaster recovery. This means addressing risk in all its dimensions. For example, reducing hazards or hazardous events, reducing vulnerability and exposure, and hence building resilience. One particular application that we are seeing emerging in Asia Pacific cities is the application of nature-based solution into the concept and principle of resilient infrastructure, as I just pointed in the previous slide. Ranging from China's spawn cities to road construction in Nepal to the coastal city adaptation in Indonesia, building with nature approaches have shown multiple biophysical and socioeconomic benefits. Further, nature-based solution also offers a dual benefit of enhancing adaptation and reducing the impact of disasters, including through green disaster control infrastructure. Now, thanks to a very vibrant Asia-Pacific science, technology, and academia advisory group, of which Takako-san is a very active member, we have recently developed a regional framework for natural hazards triggering technological disaster, simply put, NATEC risks, based on around 20 case studies from 10 countries in the region. One of the consultations for this work was actually hosted at the RIDS in Tohoku University. NATEC risks provide a good basis to demonstrate the expanded scope of the Sendai framework. In particular, the NATEC risks faced by the Asia-Pacific region is of special significance due to two specific reasons. First, the potential of NATEC events to compound the impact of natural hazards, and second, so little is known about the past and potential NATEC events. So based on this analysis, we have developed 10 principles of NATEC risk management. And these principles range from a thorough understanding of risk to building appropriate safety codes and widespread communication, underscored by capacity building at all levels. Now, all of these paradigmatic shifts that we have pointed out to require us to revisit who is our target audience. A key shift we have to make is to move beyond preaching to the converts. We need to communicate better with the planning and finance ministries, to the central bankers, trade representatives, the real estate developers, for them to appreciate the value of risk. And this anniversary is also an appropriate moment to draw attention to the fact that 680 million people live below the 10 meters above sea level, putting them at grave risk of tsunamis, the deadliest of all sudden onset disasters. So let me conclude by pointing out to what we are doing from our side since the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake in terms of engaging with the communities by diversifying our stakeholder base. We have invested heavily in enhancing inclusiveness in DRR actions. In particular, each of the stakeholder groups in Asia Pacific has structured themselves around a coordination mechanism that you see on the screen. And such a structured approach to stakeholder inclusiveness is the hallmark of the Sendai framework. I'm very pleased to inform that through iterative steps, we have moved on from engagement, including just through meetings and coordination mechanisms, to programmatic collaboration, resulting in a series of knowledge products and policy guidance. So to conclude, we need to appreciate the risk complexity, understand the value of systemic risk and its management. Accountability in risk and hence its disclosure and hence its pricing is very important, which then has implications in public financing mechanisms. But most importantly, we need to move on from a government approach to disaster risk reduction to a governance approach, which doesn't focus only on the government, but a whole of society approach. With these words, let me conclude, and thanks a lot to everyone for a patient hearing. This would actually also be one of my last appearances in the region. I have just been informed that I'll be moving on, having spent 10 years in Africa and several years in Asia Pacific, to Europe now. Starting 1st of May, I'll be joining the UNDRR Bonn office as the head of the office. And this facility is our Global Center for Climate Resilient and Disaster Statistics. So I continue to look forward to working with all the colleagues in my new global position starting May, but very happy to be here and look forward to more discussion in this webinar. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Takako-san.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. You gave us very shocking news. You are leaving the region and you are moving to Bonn at the end of your presentation. But again, thank you very much for your participation, and you summarized very, very important points in your presentation. And always we learned from your direction and also insights towards the DRR activities in the region. So you also highlight and mentioned about the review of the progress in Sendai framework and also the SDGs, and gave us a message we need to work more, because so far the achievement is not really enough. And plus, more important infrastructure and nature and the ecosystem based DRR. And also we have to remember more than 60 million people are still at the risk for tsunami. So I'm sure we can we should corroborate to enhance their capacity for tsunami early warning or preparedness in this region. So once again, we really look forward to our future collaboration from your Europe office in Bonn, and don't forget about our region. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. And okay, thank you. So now I'd like to invite the second speaker, Professor Dr. Rajib Shaw. And unfortunately, he will not be here with us today due to the very urgent matter. So he kindly sent us the video recording. So Professor Rajib Shaw, I'm sure most of you know about him, and he's a professor of Keio University in the Graduate School of Media and Graduate School of Media and Governance in Keio University. And he is the co-chair of the United Nations Asia Science Technology Academia Advisory Group, ASTAC, and coordinating lead author IPCC's 6th assessment report. He is the editor of a book series on disaster risk reduction published by Springer, and the chief editor of an academic journal, Progress in Disaster Science by Elsevier. Because we will change the screen to his presentation.
A very good afternoon and good morning to all our colleagues and viewers. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in this online Zoom session, so I'm sharing this recorded video. What I would like to point out here about this 2011 East Japan earthquake and tsunami, especially on the science technology in DRR. So I try to do it 10 years in 10 minutes with 10 key learning. At the onset, my sincere thanks and appreciation to Professor Takako Izumi of Tohoku University, IRIDES, as well as other colleagues from APRU, Multi-Hazard Program, who have been organizing this particular very, very important webinar. So starting from number one, as you know that in the science technology has evolved quite strongly after last 10 years. I will say that after the major events which you are seeing here in your screen, we had 2015 Sendai framework. That upper part is the global event and the lower part are the regional events. So we had first 2016 Global Science Technology Conference and Roadmap, which we actually revised in 2019 in global platform. In between, there have been other 2 global platforms and also Science Technology Conference. At the regional level, the first time we formed the Asia Pacific, that time it was Asia, Science Technology Advisory Group. That was in May 2015. Then we had the first Science Technology Conference in 2016 in Thailand. The second one in 2018 in Beijing. The third one was last year in Malaysia. And in between, there was the ministerial conference where we have been putting our science technology input. So I think both at the global level and the regional level, science into decision making and policy making at the global and regional level, yes. So it has been quite strong. The second is, from that level, if we come to the national level, there have been lots of new developments in many countries. I just give you an example of this Malaysia, where NADMA, National Disaster Management Authority, which is the main body of the disaster management, they have a science expert panel on DRR. And the scientific expert panel does not necessarily mean, and that is very important, that it's not only just the scientist, but it comes from the members come from the technical institute, universities, NGOs, private sector. and there is a direct input into this decision making. So I would like to emphasize here that science technology into disaster management does not necessarily mean that it is all scientists who are doing here. There are many other stakeholders, and it's very important how we work with those stakeholders and applying science and technology into the DRR. The second point. Third point is, I think gradually we have been looking more on the systemic and the cascading risk. Earlier it was more hazard specific, but Sendai, like the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and the nuclear meltdown showed us the importance of the cascading risk. Also, what we saw last year, the whole biological hazards or the coronavirus impact, I think the cascading risks become very, very important. And this is a very interesting book. I strongly encourage those who are interested in the systemic risk to look at that. It talks about history, measurement, and regulation. So in the science technology part, we have been increasingly focusing more on the complex emergencies through systemic and cascading risk. Number 4 is the emerging and new technologies. And I always say that the yesterday's emerging technologies are today's essential technologies. So after 2011, I think that use of the drones became very, very effective, especially when people could not go near the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, which was having the nuclear meltdown. So there were lots of drone surveys, especially to make the measurement of the nuclear radioactivity. And that became an important tool for future survey. So now we use drone for many different aspects. There are drone pilot associations in Japan, which is a combination of government, industry, and academia. There are 32 drone schools, which gives the license to the professional drone pilots. So this is a totally new job opportunities which are coming up. Apart from drone, IoT, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, robotics, blockchain. So there are many other new technologies which are coming up, and these are possibly becoming part of our regular technology development and usage. So that's number 4. Number 5 is our interdisciplinarity. Especially, it's not just because of last year pandemic, but I think that gradually the health science is a classic example, that like how we are collaborating with health science, with different other, like the environmental science, or even the data science, or the the supply chain management, or different types of resource mobilization. So these are some of the examples, like WHO has their health emergency disaster risk management framework. Then even DRR had health addendum for the resilience scorecard. With our colleague Emily Chan and myself, we published the public health and the disasters, and looking at more in the cross boundary of the multidisciplinary. So I think what I'm trying to point out here is that this type of multidisciplinarity becoming very, very important. That's also another good good sign. Then open science and open data. So there have been quite a bit of discussions on how DRR can be used as a public goods. It started in Sendai also. And to make the open science policy or the open data policy, we always have the problem of with data, but who owns the data? Is it the private sector? Is it the government? Or is it the community? So for example, in the health sector, is it the hospital who owns the data, or is it the individual who owns their own health data? So I think it's becoming more, I won't say that it is solved, but there have been already a positive trend or positive movement to make this open data, open science policy. And that is going to possibly change the future course of disaster risk reduction. The next point is, again, the private sector and product innovation. So we have been seeing the environment field, that how they have used this color, green, as a very good business strategy by many private sector, whether it is the green building, whether it is the green roofing, or whether it is the green transport. That means all the environment friendly product. So similarly, I think gradually we don't have a color for the disaster risk reduction yet. I won't go into the details of that, but I think gradually we are seeing that the private sectors are getting into more product-based innovation. I give you a couple of examples, like this company called Water. So they have the AI-based water recycling facility, which have been used in different temporary shelter, especially with only 2% water usage. You can actually use that recycled water for have 100 people to take shower. The water saving, there have been lots of new elements into the water saving, whether in the nozzles and so on. This particular Teijin, it's a major company in Japan. They have been using the heat-resistant paint, which reduce the surface temperature by 13 to 15 degree, and that also causes the energy saving, and that have been used in different places, whether in the buses or roofs and so on. So I think this product become very, very important. But also important thing is the process. And there, when you talk about the grassroots and the process innovation, the citizen science becomes very, very important. I give you two examples here. One is like using the augmented reality and try to understand the inundation level, and that how we can inundation level due to flooding, and how you can change, transfer that particular inundation level into a mapping process so that people can actually make their traffic diversion. And the second one is what we did in Bangladesh using the smart water solution, try to help the local communities to understand the safe drinking water sources where the groundwater is contaminated, surface water is with salinity, and there is scarcity of water due to rainfall pattern change. So citizen science is playing a very important role there. And a couple of last points at the youth leadership. Many of you know that IRDR, Integrated Research for Disaster Risk, the 10-year program, they have started the Young Scientist program. Now more than 162 young scientists from different countries. You Inspire Alliance with UNESCO and different other countries. It's a very energetic young group. This book which you saw here, Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, this is a contribution from the IRDR Young Scientists. So youth are gradually taking a very, very strong leadership, and overall in science and technology, but also the broader field into the disaster risk reduction. And the final point is what I'm seeing, it's not a major movement, but a little bit of new movement is what I call the sci-preunership, which is linking science with the entrepreneurship. So it's not only just the traditional research in the university, but how we can work with the private sector and bridge this gap between private sector and research and policy through innovation and knowledge. So possibly this is only a very small glimpse of the major changes what is happening into science and technology. But for the sake of time, I will stop here. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar, and my apologies that I was not been able to participate in this very important webinar in a live manner, but I hope that I could give some of the glimpses of evolution of science technology over the last 10 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, it is very unfortunate we could not have him today, and also we could not ask him any questions and to hear from him any answers. But he also summarized a very important point in his presentation, which will be the multidisciplinary collaboration. And we really need to think about how we can work together, scientific perspective and support from the private sector and grassroots and youth leadership, which is very, very crucial. Okay, so now I'd like to invite next speaker, Dr. Anders Carlson. He is a vice president, Global Strategic Networks in Elsevier. And before Elsevier, he was for 5 years counselor for science and innovation at Embassy of Sweden in Tokyo, Japan. And prior to that, he was for 10 years professor in quantum photonics at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And he has been visiting scientist at NTT Basic Research Labs, Stanford University as a Fulbright visiting scholar, École Polytechnique Paris, and Chesien University, and senior advisor at Osaka University. He has a PhD in electrical engineering and a Master of Science in Engineering Physics, both from the Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm in Sweden. So thank you for your participation, Dr. Carlson, and floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Izumi, and let me share my screen and start slideshow there. So I hope you can see my screen right now. So I'm actually very honored to be invited to speak at this very important webinar to 10-year remembrance of the Great East Japan earthquake. So what I hope to convey here are mainly some personal experiences from 3/11 with a focus on science communication during crisis. In 2011, as Takako was mentioned, I was working as science counselor at the Embassy of Sweden in Tokyo. The main work was to provide policy intelligence to Swedish government and funders, as well as to catalyze and support collaborations in science. Intense work, maybe it was, but perhaps not as dramatic. However, on March 11, I was at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs to discuss the Sweden-Japan science collaboration, when all of a sudden at 1446, the world around us started to shake. And I believe all of us who were in Japan at the time will remember this day and what unfolded basically forever. It changed the lives, took many lives, changed the lives of so many. It changed Japan as a nation, and it sent ripples across the world. So I will focus here on 3 aspects of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. So first, I will discuss how an embassy, in this case, the Swedish embassy, would work during this type of crisis. What are some key aspects of work, and perhaps that this can give some hints and what could be learnings. Second, I will give some conclusions from a Swedish cross-ministerial disaster medicine investigation, a fact-finding mission in 2012, which from the Swedish Embassy Science Office, I had the privilege to co-host. And third, since we're now currently in the middle of a global pandemic, are there some early learnings from this? And since I work since 2012 at Elsevier, an information analytics company and publisher, I will give some specific context and comments around the attention to science communication during crisis. So let me go back to start to the triple disaster itself. I mean, it's said that a disaster never comes alone. And in 2011, Japan faced battles on many fronts. First, the number of casualties due to the tsunami and earthquake. Second, the nuclear meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. And third, the loss of infrastructure. What maybe is less known is that it was not only nuclear plants that were stopped or halted, but also a number of other power plants were basically destroyed. The coal power and oil power plants are, of course, more easy to repair, but there was a huge loss of infrastructure as well, which made the recovery work more challenging, which made it more challenging for Japan as a whole. So, okay, what does an embassy do during such a crisis? So first of all, key priorities would be towards their own citizens in the region, as well as reporting back on potential consequences, global consequences. Second, of course, is to see when international aid organizations come in to provide relief aid, to make sure that the communication is going well. And of course, all the bilateral discussions that were held. So I actually clearly remember in the evening of 3/11, looking at the TV, learning how the situation at Fukushima Daiichi got worse and worse. And then on March 12, when the first hydrogen explosions happened, my own background, as Takako was mentioned, is in engineering physics. So I had taken a course in nuclear engineering, nuclear physics. So I had some grasp of what was really beginning to be and what became really, really quite severe. So as I led our embassy science office, a lot of my work came to focus on how the nuclear accidents would unfold. So there are many things done, various briefings, risk assessments, continuous dialogue back to our own radiation safety authority. The dialogue with Swedes in Japan that the embassy did. What should be done? Should there be evacuations? Should there be iodine pills handed out? And actually the Swedish government handed out iodine pills to Swedish citizens. And is there a need to protect the embassy itself to ensure the operations? And we took the decision, as well as many embassies did, to stay in Tokyo. Many embassies also relocated just as a measure of precaution. So some relocated to Hiroshima, some to Kyoto, etc. We also got various additional staff sent in, and we hosted a number of expert delegations as well. And to the left side, on your screen, you see some of those, which on my side, I co-hosted. We were out in the field actually doing various measurements just in order to work together with the Japanese authorities, as well as to have our own check on what were kind of, in this case, radiation levels. Okay. So during the triple disaster, notably as Fukushima unfolded, there was a big need to get accurate information. One of the key challenges which I come back to is around communication and information. It's, of course, extremely challenging for any government, on any level, and for citizens as a disaster unfolds. For us to really understand what was going on during the initial weeks, we had to triangulate from a number of sources. There were daily briefings from the Minister of Foreign Affairs for all the diplomatic community. We had continuous dialogue with EU radiation safety experts, our own. We set up a Nordic collaboration. We actually produced, and this kind of gives a hint, we ourselves produced a joint document with various sources, again to triangulate, which was circulated to something called the Science Technology Diplomatic Circle. We had meetings with the TEPCO, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of US, the UK, many Japanese experts. We followed Foreign Press Club, social media, etc. So the information challenge during such a crisis is real, I should say. So let me give just as a simple example. The Fukushima nuclear accident was on the highest level of severity globally, as on equal level compared to Chernobyl. It could have had much more severe consequences than it actually had. However, I must say, and this is perhaps a personal opinion, there was also some overreaction, notably, I should say, in foreign media. So let me just illustrate that with two clips from Swedish tabloids. After the hydrogen explosions, there was a small spike in radiation levels in Tokyo. So on the 15th, the Swedish tabloid said that all Swedes should flee. And even the Radiation Safety Authority said that everyone within 80 kilometers should evacuate. The radiation is extremely high. And on March 20, it started to rain actually. And what happens when it rains, it brings down the radioactive particles, the dust basically, to the ground. So levels slightly increase. So of course the headlines became radioactive rain threatens Tokyoites. All of this sounds extremely scary, but just as one hint, let me add what is the natural background radiation level in Sweden, in its capital of Stockholm, as a comparison. So what happened when it rained was that the radiation level in Tokyo, being much lower than in Stockholm, just became on the same level as the Swedish average. And I have to say that this type of comparison was not really done, and this could have caused some confusions. So, but not to underestimate the severity of what could have happened. We have to be clear on that. So there is a challenge of communication, and here are some pictures I took from internet. There was set up a Facebook page called Tokyo Radiation Levels. And one of the challenges is that media, and increasingly social media, are faster than official channels. And sometimes it's more speculative. And I have to say that in this case, radiation risks, because we are not familiar to that, we do not often, unless you have studied nuclear engineering, right? We are not, it's invisible, right? So we are not aware what are kind of normal levels and what are reasonable, what are the risks, the normal risks. And you will fear what you don't understand. So I believe, and I think that one of the conclusions that have come out is that governments will need to invest extra resources and skills around communicating risks for instance, radiation or other things that are not as easily grasped. And being a scientist of background myself, sometimes having studied a topic, it helps. But sometimes it does not help as well, because you may understand it yourself, but it may also mean that you don't get why other people don't get it. So there is a clear balance, a clear things to be understood on how you're communicating. So that is one thing I like to stress a bit. So if you don't believe me in this respect, there was a very nice article written it happens to be an Elsevier journal, I just found it, by the UK embassy. The UK embassy, I think, did a brilliant work overall. They invested quite heavily around various informations and so forth. So the Embassy Science Council at the time wrote a personal view himself and saying what did the public really want to know? So three things. The public wanted to know whether and why it was still safe. The public wanted to know what personal precautions they should take. And they needed information from someone they trusted. And I will not go into issues around mistrust on communications from governments, either in Japan or outside, but trusted information during this type of events as they unfold is quite critical. So with that, I like to end the first part. And then I want to go into the second part of my presentation. Since many years, the Swedish government have established a study group called the Swedish Disaster Medicine Study Organization. In Swedish, it's abbreviated as CAMEDO. And 1 year after the triple disaster, my embassy science office co-hosted a 16-person expert delegation coming to Japan for a week. And they had done extensive preparation in advance. Some of them had already been in Japan earlier on. Already the first delegation we had was in April. And Sweden as such we don't have really earthquakes or tsunamis, But at the time, we had 12 nuclear plants in operation. And the objective of this CAMEDO delegation is to strengthen the emergency preparedness, notably for cascaded disasters. And in this case, there was a bit of focus on the nuclear accident. And you can see there, this report is actually, there's an English version of this one. It's available online. It's a public report. They do most of these reports, and you see this is number 98. They are available online. So one of the key learnings from the CAMEDO delegation, the pictures, by the way, are pictures I took during this delegation, which was in Japan for a bit more than a week. One of key learnings is that it's important to meet stakeholders from all levels of society. So here's the list of all the different organizations we met, including a number of key policymakers and experts outside those that are listed there. So not surprising, at such early stages of a recovery effort, the perspective on how the recovery is going and what are the learnings, how things were done initially, will differ quite significantly from a national perspective, a regional one, a city level government one, to affected citizens. And we had interviews with village mayors, with the prefectural governments, with all the relevant ministries and so on. And again, one of the things that came out, and this was notably so with the interviews with the village mayors, the NGOs, and some of the private citizens, farmers, was the lack of accurate information at early stages. It is challenging, but that was one of the things that came out. So the CAMEDO delegation, they came out with several recommendations. Let me list only a few of those here. Again, it's all there. It's an English report. You may try the Swedish one as well, but to make it easier, there's an English version available. The link is there. So first of all, governments need to prepare for remote events. Increasingly in a global world, we have many citizens living abroad. In the case of Sweden, actually, in 2004, at the tsunami that hit Southeast Asia heavily, Sweden have many families going on Christmas holidays in Thailand, notably. So they were quite severely affected. Second one, risk cost analysis. How do you prepare for an extended crisis? How much should be invested in terms of preparation for something that is rare, but could be very costly? The medical preparation is not only at the first stages, but then there's a need for trauma expertise. And we're seeing that also in the current pandemic, the long-term effects will be quite significant. So trusted communication with the general public, a key factor. And in this very case, given the particular nature of radiation, that poses additional challenges. And there could be a need, and this has been identified as well also in Japan, in increased education. And finally, a good dialogue, government and citizens, to avoid breaking promises, not to make too early promises on a fast recovery, because that could breach trust. Okay, finally, let me shift to the third part. We are all right now in the middle of a global pandemic. Are there some lessons, early lessons from this? One of the learnings, of course, is that history repeats itself. Here I will speak a bit more from the perspective of Elsevier as an information analytics company and major publishers in the life sciences and medical sciences. One of early observations actually, and I take in the picture here from the WHO, is that we not only have a pandemic, but also an infodemic. And misinformation can lead to interventions being less effective. And I believe we have actually seen this infodemic less in Japan, but it has been omnipresent in other regions of the world. Take the United States as one example, and take Europe, even my own native country, Sweden. So to put a bit of perspective from Elsevier, in terms of science, because most of you who listen here are scientists, I think, or policymakers. What's the changes in science brought by the pandemic? Professor Shaw already brought up one aspect in terms of the more early data sharing, for instance. Overall, as we're all moving online, we're seeing an accelerated digital transformation and also how research is done. We're seeing an increasing use of sharing of data and early research before the process of peer review in itself. However, moving at faster speed, all the stakeholders in the research ecosystem, we need to be aligned on that we are maintaining rigor and public trust in science as we move along at a faster speed. And actually, I have to say, although we have seen some pockets of distrust, if you look at recent polls, the public trust in science is actually very high. We are putting our trust in the vaccine development right now. And thanks to speedy approval of trials, for instance, approval of use, we are seeing vaccines being rolled out and administered right now. So as a company, how actually, just to mention some things we have done, and just to emphasize here that during these types of pandemics, all publishers, other companies, Spring in Nature, Wiley, Elsevier as well, at the very earliest stage, we're sharing all our content directly to the relevant authorities such as WHO, but we're also making it public. So for instance, we alone have provided more than 41,000 research articles out there free to read. We're building various hubs to support the healthcare community, as well as opening up tools to researchers and others working on coronavirus research. This is what we do. This is what others do, such as, let's say, Wiley, Spring in Nature. So in this respect, just to highlight one thing, noting that we, as Elsevier, we have the flagship journal, The Lancet. And The Lancet has actually put together a quite big commission called the Lancet COVID Commission. And they provided just recently an update. And I think some of the recommendations, I pick up 3 here. They also mirrors back really nicely to the learnings of 3.11. So first of all, strengthening the multilateral response, be it with WHO, UN bodies, INF, all the vital organizations should be provided with expanded political support as well as financial resources by member states. We are seeing the need of deploying non-pharmaceutical interventions, and the learnings from notably East Asian nations in how the use of border controls, the social distancing, in Japan, the so-called Sanmitsu or 3 Cs, of how to avoid close distance, closed rooms, and crowded places. Those type of learnings are very important, these non-pharmaceutical interventions. And also in the pandemic, and also what's been seen in earlier disasters, is the risk and the widening of inequalities. The COVID-19 infection rates, deaths, the economic effects and crises are unequally distributed within countries and across the world, especially hitting many vulnerable groups. And I believe this is also one of the learnings from the 3.11. So to wrap up, two things. Science communication could save lives. This is some experience from a doctoral students who witnessed in epidemiology, who was in Africa during the Ebola outbreak. And she saw that the communities and international media often lacked understanding why particular regulations and were put in place by governments. And this poor communication led to confusion. And it led actually to cases where people did not trust should they go, for instance, to medical clinics and so forth. So she put some general messages, notably to early career researchers in communication: be to the point, write clearly, get a second opinion, and stick to the facts. And again, to go back to the COVID-19 pandemic, and let me end with some observation from Dr. Gregory Poland. He's the founder and director of Mayo Clinic's Vaccine Research Group. And he's also the editor-in-chief of the Elsevier published journal called Vaccine. And since the onset of the pandemic, Dr. Poland has given more than 1,200 talks and interviews around the topic. And he has seen a complacency from parts of society in not understanding the seriousness of the pandemic. And he described this as a madness on global scale. But he offered some advices on how to get messages to stick. And just let me read the thing in italic. What sticks in your mind is usually to do with the passion, the feeling of the person conveying the information. We can draw on that to mold the information, make it memorable, and shapes people's future behavior in a meaningful way. And I think in communicating science, in communicating risks, we also have to put in that passion and what it means and the importance of it. So let me end by not any conclusions, just reflections, very humble reflections. I believe that the world at large have been very impressed by Japan, the resilience of Japan and its people. Despite the many challenges and hardships, how Japan have handled the disaster is a learning experience for the world. I have emphasized this strongly. Disaster sheds light on the role of trusted information. During the triple disaster, there was a lack of trusted information. It is understandable because there was an immense pressure on everyone, a strong severity of the disaster, but also in terms of preparedness for what will come. And we also know that we will see more geophysical, biological disasters, quite a few of them accelerated by the ongoing climate crisis. And together we need to also be good at communicating a sense of urgency, but also that there is hope and we can do things, and we have to do this in an engaging way. And with that, I like to thank everyone and leave the floor back to Dr. Takako. So I stop share.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carlson, for your very informative presentation based on your actual experiences at the time of the Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami, especially about the Fukushima incident. And also, you also touched upon about the current issue, COVID-19, which is also very informative for us. And you also highlighted the importance of communicating risk, and also the science as well, the results. Then, after a Great East Japan Earthquake, it's already 10 years. Do you see any progress in the field of risk communication, in which you really emphasized its importance?
I believe people have became more aware on one hand. On the other hand, we have also seen an accelerated use of social media, which even in 2011 was not fully there. And this poses additional challenges. And in terms of the pandemic, what has been seen in quite many countries is a polarization of opinion. So you're either for or against, and that is not really helping things. In my native Sweden, public experts have been threatened, even death threats, but also those who have not been much in favor of the current way the country has handled the pandemic have also received threats. And this is the same across the world in many countries. And this is actually a challenge, because if we're not bridging such things, we have the risk of the measures and advice given will not be taken up. So this I see as the continued challenge. So the advice would be for all organizations, there is a need for professional risk communication.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Carlson, for your also the advice to have the professional risk communication. I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of the communication, and in particular about the risk and science. Okay, so I'm very sorry because of the time limitation, we have to close this session. But again, thank you so much for your presentation. Very, very insightful, and from the scientific perspective as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I'd like to invite the next speaker, Ms. Suvendolini Kakuchi. She is a Sri Lankan journalist and author based in Tokyo. And she has a long career writing on development issues, including disasters in Japan and Asia. Her coverage of the March 11th, 2011 triple disaster focused on the importance of the media communicating lessons learned from the field to reduce loss of lives and property. In her work in Armenia, India, and other Asian countries, she has presented and produced international publications that share Japanese reporting strategies for disaster safety and effective official and academic and community response. She's a former Neyman Fellow, Harvard University, and was the first Asian female president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. So we are very, very grateful and fortunate to have you here today, Ms. Kakuchi, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation from the media perspective. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm delighted to join everyone. As Dr. Izumi introduced, I am a journalist, so I don't speak from the academic field. But there were a couple of points that really emphasized the role of the media in disaster prevention. Particularly I was interested in the comment about the multilateral response. And I think that kind of emphasizes that the more journalists reporting correctly on disasters is very important for preventing disasters and also recovery. So let me begin by just saying that, the media is really, journalists are really busy and they're running around and doing 100 different reports on 100 different subjects every day. But disasters have now become quite mainstream. And as I've said in my next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, so, and why is disasters becoming so important for the media is because disasters are increasing. And also when we write about disasters, we also include the very important topic of climate change and SDGs, which are now taken up at government level all over the world. And I also think that with the population in many countries moving into urban areas, the reporting on urban disasters are going to be more important. And I've listed some of the subjects that we cover quite a bit, like water logging is a big problem in developing countries. And of course, the air pollution and basically how this affects the economy of the country. Next slide. Next slide, please. So let me just quickly go through the fact that, re-emphasize the fact that journalists are very important for disaster prevention and recovery. And why is that? Because, what we write is read all over. I mean, the wide dissemination from the media cannot be compared to anything else. So what we write as a result can really strengthen disaster risk reduction. And as we can say, particularly in Japan, which has a very active media on disaster reporting, the media plays a big role in early warning messages. And also, during information, a lot of people rely on the media, and what they read in the media is very helpful for their contribution to disaster recovery. Because, for example, during the March 11 triple disaster, we journalists go to the field and they go to the site. So their reporting is viewed by the public as directly from the recovery site and also objective. So we play a big role in recovery as well. Next slide, please. And also the other importance of journalists becoming more involved in disaster reporting is our reports are taken as a documentation. 10 years later, 20 years later, our reports are cited very much by scholars. And also in the formation of government policy, journalist reports are very important. And please do not forget that journalists think of themselves as watchdogs. And so they can be quite critical in their reporting in the recovery process. And that is because our reports are supposed to play the role of watchdogs. So we're very vigilant about corruption during a recovery process, the equality of recovery, what's happening in evacuation sites, are they gender friendly? All these things journalists really go into their reports. I've also put down the fact that journalists play a social role. So my personal experience is that when I go to the site, a lot of survivors, they want to talk to journalists and tell their stories, and they feel better because of that. And our stories also help to identify, because during a disaster, lots of people cannot locate each other. So we can, they read what we write and then try to contact each other. And the importance, I think Dr. Carrison, was talking about the importance of correct information. So if journalists are given the correct information and in a timely fashion, the reports of journalists are very important to stop panic and rumors. And the next slide, please. So here I'm just giving you our listeners today, how journalists usually report on disasters. And for the first 2 weeks, we focus a lot on emergency stories. So we are looking for data. And also we are looking at the rescue efforts and the lifeline. Is it available for people, and government decisions on the emergency aspect of the disaster. 1 month later, we kind of look at how is recovery progressing. Is there enough aid, and are there enough volunteers helping out? So this 1 month later story is basically looking at these kind of subjects. And then 6 months later also, a lot of the journalists' disaster reports focus on recovery, rehabilitation, resilience of the community. And also they're very, very focused on the recovery progress, we can be quite critical if it's not going fast. And that is also a bit of a fault on the part of the journalists, because we can tend to be quite impatient. I mean, so we ask some difficult questions. Next one, please. Next story. So here I'm just giving you some example from March 2011, and there's been research done on what information was the fastest and what people relied on, and Twitter was right on top. I didn't put the graph here, but I have the graph which shows that most people got their information. I mean, almost 100% got their immediate information from Twitter. And we have talked about the social media, and there is no doubt that they are the first informers during a disaster, because this information is coming from the people on the ground, and journalists take some time to get there. So the citizen witnessing is a big part of the media reporting on disasters. The traditional media hits in later on, maybe a couple of hours later. I mean, as a foreign correspondent, I knew that a lot of correspondents just hired a car and went off in the night to the site. So television, radio, and print were also very important information. There was another thing that I learned from the March 11th disaster was that the local media, there was a big difference between the mainstream media based in Tokyo and the big cities and the local media in that area, because the big media leaves after a while. And so a lot of people got their information logging on to the local newspapers and the local radio stations. So this is another important lesson about the media from the March 11th disaster. So the next one, next slide, please. Talking about my own experience, I think I was in Tokyo when the big disaster hit, and the telephones didn't work and the roads were broken, so it was very difficult for journalists to reach the disaster site. So this was, I think, maybe one reason why the media could not give good or well-informed reports, because of the breakdown of the telecommunications. So we had to rely on the social media. And the messages that were going around, and also the battery radio was played a lot of a big role in information sharing on the site between people. And this is particularly because I don't think Japan was ready for such a big disaster and the breakdown. And I think whatever information that could be relayed from the sites was being controlled by the government, because they needed more faster information. Thank you. Next one. Next slide, please. And this is what was obvious for the foreign media. I mean, there were so many foreign media that came into Tokyo just to report on the disaster, but their main focus was on the nuclear plant, Fukushima nuclear plant breakdown. And even myself, because I was reporting for another newspaper at that time, the editors were very focused on the nuclear meltdown, because I think that was what the international readers were very interested in, what was going on. And we didn't have much information in Tokyo. So as you can see here, I've compared NHK and BBC. NHK was, putting out a lot of reports. I had to rely a lot on NHK, but the experts were more local, and the BBC was also, given the lack of information from the Japanese government, they had to rely on foreign experts. There was also the other popular stories that we covered were the medical and the nuclear technology. All of us, I mean, overnight became experts on nuclear technology. The other lesson, of course, was that we also wrote that, in fact, the human losses was not so strong from breaking buildings, but rather from the tsunami, and the impact of a big tsunami was really more important than the earthquake, I think, in our stories. And also we were talking, as mentioned before by the other speakers, the resilience of the survivors. Yes, next story. So next slide, please. So here is just a quick thing I'm talking about. There's been research done on, let me just go back to the BBC slide, which is a report on the nuclear meltdown, and you can see that the BBC used a lot of these kind of images where you can see the actual smoke. The risk of radiation was very high. And the next one, please, the NHK slides were more, more focusing on the importance of stability at this time of emergency. So these kind of images were used more frequently on NHK, which is the national, the public broadcasting station in Japan. Next slide, please. So the next slide, thank you, the next slide. So here I'm kind of analyzing why, and I've used a study from Doshisha University, and it shows that a lot of the government sources relied on by the Japanese media was mostly government, and also TEPCO, that is the company that runs the Fukushima nuclear power plants that were damaged. And here the BBC had a greater focus on the impact of radiation. And they quoted a lot of foreign experts. The study also showed that, that the print media tends to have more objective and less emotional coverage than than TV. I mean, we are talking about the importance of passion and emotion in media broadcasts. So I think the TV appeals to that kind of aspect in their reporting. Next source. Next one. So the next slide, please. And here we have the media coverage, and I have quoted Professor Uchida. Here he has found out that Japanese journalists were more neutral in their coverage. They tried to balance their coverage with the official reports, and but they were far more emotional and more story-led when it came to earthquake and tsunami reports. The reports that we all filed, I mean, this includes us, I think, because the lack of information from scientists at that time, particularly, and also our personal knowledge, which is not very, professional. This kind of reporting, I also think, contributed in the public mistrust of the reports. I mean, if you can recall, I don't have any photos here, but there was a lot of protests against nuclear technology at that time by ordinary people, because people were really very worried about the radiation risk, and that could be because of the lack of proper information. Also, our reporting, the media kind of, when it comes to disaster reporting, they tend to be more emotional, because I think one of the main focuses on media reporting is to create sympathy for the survivors and the disaster sites in the outside readers. Okay, the other lessons that the media learned and what we projected in our media reporting. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so what we learned and what we projected in our reports was that, the technology, because Japan is really top in international when it comes to earthquake prevention and earthquake information technology, but also the fact that it was obvious when we went to the sites that this technology alone cannot save people. And so there was the Sendai framework that came out of the March 11 tragedy, and that was the concept of self-help and mutual help. And this was adopted in 2015, which also shows that the importance of people being able to help each other, and also that each person should be more aware of the science of disasters so that they can help themselves. We also found out that a lot of research after the disaster showed that communities who helped each other were able to prevent loss. And that was kind of a very big lesson, at least for me, that if, particularly when you live in big cities, we hardly know each other. And so I think a lot of people in Tokyo started having these exchanges with each other. So the importance of building a resilient community and Kizuna was very important lesson that we reported on. Next one, please. So I just want to, these are some of the other things that we are reporting at the current moment. I mean, I don't think the media has stopped reporting on March 11, 2011. We continue to, and this mental health issue, if I could, because I don't have much time, mental health issues are now becoming very, reported quite a bit. And the 10th anniversary, we could see there was a lot of information on how people remember and how people are still traumatized after the disaster. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide. So I'm just talking about the importance of anniversaries for the media. This is a time when I think experts, scientists, scholars who want to put out their research could be a very good timing. When we talk about these anniversary stories, we focus on the survivors. These are some of the issues that I have put up here. Is what we have just reported on the 10th anniversary. Next one, please. Next one, please. So this is the media focus when it comes to 10th anniversary. We want to show the progress. We want to show the recovery. And so this is the before story. And the next slide, please. Next one. Can I have, and this is the after story. So these are the kind of photos, and these are the kind of images, and these are the themes of our story that we want to report for the anniversary stories. And finally, next one. Sorry, next one, please. So these are some of, I've mentioned the importance of Kizuna or bonding that came out of the March 11 tragedy. So this is the way that people are talking about what happened at that time. And this is a disaster, sharing the information with young people so that they can be more prepared. Next one, please. Next one, please. And this is also, we had, this is 2005. This is another anniversary story, and it shows the progress, the evacuation and the new homes that have been built for the affected people. Next slide, please. Okay, next one. And also I put this in because this is also a very important story for the media, the remembrance and the important, and the government remembrance is also very important for the media, and it conveys the message that we care for each other, which is another important story when covering disasters. Thank you very much. I think I've come to the end. Yes, there's one more photo I wanted to show. Yeah, this is also very, very powerful story that the media conveys. Thank you very much. And also, yeah, finally, I think the last one, sorry about this slide. And I've talked about the importance that journalists are very interested in science now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kakuchi, for your very, very, yeah, how to say it, very informative, of course, but very wonderful and excellent presentation, who showed us how media works during and after the disaster. So I understand and I learned a lot of how important the role of media can play in all the phases of disaster management. So you also mentioned currently the usage of SNS like Twitter and other social media. People use those things more than the traditional media. So in that case, what do you think? What do we have to be more careful to trust those kind of information? And these information will be sent not only the professional journalists, but rather it's just public. Then how we can the trust which one is the accurate and which one is not really accurate, and what would be your advice to us?
Well, I think the recent pandemic is one of the examples. The importance of social media cannot be denied. So I think the government and also institutions should have a very strong social media presence. So the more information we have from the social media, from these institutions and from the government, it kind of balances out so that the ordinary reader can read both sides and make their own informed decisions. So the importance of strengthening social media in all institutions and government and experts and universities, I think this has to be strengthened more.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I totally agree. We need to have some balance, not really too much trust on and rely on social media, but also the traditional media is also very important, especially the writing, to keep the record. So that's also we have to be very careful to balancing it. And thank you so much. And I believe we really need to work together with media to enhance the DRR capacity and also to keep the record and the memories and bring our memories and experiences in the future and to the next generation.
Yes,
and
I
thank
agree.
you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Kakuchi. Thank you. Okay, now then I'd like to invite the last speaker for today, Mr. Takeshi Komino. And Mr. Komino is the General Secretary of CWS Japan and co-chairperson of Japan Platform. Also, he serves as Secretary General and a member of Executive Committee for Asian Disaster Reduction and Response Network, Joint Secretariat of Japan CSO Coalition for DRR, and the chairperson of Japan Quality and Accountability Network. He graduated from Doshisha University and holds Development Studies master's degree from Brandeis University. And he has tremendous experiences all over the world for humanitarian assistance, disaster response recovery, as well as disaster risk reduction. So thank you so much, Mr. Komino, for your participation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Takako-san. And hello, everyone. My name is Takeshi Komino. Today I would like to share with you some of the insights and perspectives from NGO sector commemorating this 10-year anniversary from the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. Frankly speaking, it's quite a surprise that 10 years have already passed. This 10 years has really been a fast moving time for all of us, I think. Now, one of the things that I would like to touch on today is, so mainly I'll be speaking about two aspects. One is about this growth in NGO, NPO sector in Japan in the last 10 years. And then the second part, I would like to also speak about some of the outstanding issues. Some of them we call it the dilemma that we face today. Now, first of all, the growth in NGO, NPO sector was quite significant in this 10 years. In Japan, we often use these two words, NPOs and NGOs. So NPOs are for this non-profit organization, NGOs, non-governmental organizations. For example, the organization that I work, CWS Japan, we're both non-profit as well as non-governmental. So we're both NPO and NGO. In Japanese society, though, when you say NPO, it usually refers to the organizations who work on these domestic issues, NGOs for overseas issues. But the registration for all these organizations are all done as non-profit organization, NPO. So sometimes it's confusing. In this presentation also, I may use the word NPO, NGO, but essentially talking about the similar type of organization. Japan traditionally saw these NGOs as volunteers. And back in 1995 in the Kobe earthquake, that is also seen as we call it volunteer gannen. So it's like a first year for all these volunteer movements in Japan. In March 11, 2011 was more of these NGOs, NPOs, gannen, so to say. And it started to change quite significantly. The public donation, for example, back in 2011, or before 2011, was somewhere around 40 to 50 billion Japanese yen. But that has doubled, or more than doubled, in 2011. And after that, we do see a steadily increase in public donation in recent years, which also shows the increase in public confidence over this NGO sector. And of course, it is a small percentage as compared to other countries like the US. When you compare with the nominal GDP ratio, US, for example, is 1.44%, whereas Japan is 0.14%. But the trend is definitely a growth in our country. The other phenomenon was the increase in certified NPOs. So in Japan, there's a general registration as non-profit organization, and there's also a certified one, which also gives that tax incentive to those who donate to this organization. There was also revision to the law during this period, and they made the certification process more accessible. The growth in the general number of these nonprofit organizations, if you compare from 2011 to 2020, so at the 2020 time, it was 114% as compared to 2011. Now, but if you take a look at the certified NPOs, it's 468% as compared to 2011 status. And it definitely shows the significant increase in these professional organizations that have emerged in these last 10 years. And there are many NGO networks also that emerged after 2011 as well. I'm not naming all of them here, but I'm just naming a few. So some are thematic networks, for example, working on issues like quality, accountability, and international standards in humanitarian assistance, security management, disaster risk reduction, multi-sectoral collaboration on innovation, civic space, lessons from Fukushima nuclear power plant accident, SDGs, etc. And some are coordinating like-minded similar organizations, including like faith-based organizations for DRR, setting the sectors, this NGO sector's vision towards 2030, etc. And recently, NGOs are increasingly seen as partners in various fields. including disaster management. For example, if you take a look at the Cabinet Office's evacuation shelter guideline now, it stipulates cooperation with MPOs along with making reference or specific reference to the sphere standards, which is a big change since the 2011. After the Kumamoto earthquake in 2016, the local government units requested the NGOs to cooperate on the evacuation shelter management. And such collaboration is increasingly becoming popular these days. Japan Platform, which is the network that I also co-chair, also recently signed the MOU with Japan Association of City Mayors on cooperation around disaster management. So this cross-sector collaboration has definitely grown since 2011. However, we do see outstanding issues, dilemmas that we face from the disaster that happened 10 years back. So that is going to be my second part of my presentation. So first dilemma is that we've been seeing significant indirect or related deaths in Fukushima. So out of all the indirect related deaths from that disaster in 2011, 61.4% are people of Fukushima. And even last year, there were also 32 applications to consider the death as the indirect death from this disaster. And 27 of them were from Fukushima. And it's also significant that 90% of these indirect related deaths in Fukushima are 66 years or older. And this is an ongoing issue for many people. And it does have the implication, when we take a look at this Sendai Framework Global Target, it does have the implication to disaster mortality that we're trying to reduce. So dilemma, definitely a dilemma for all of us. Now that dilemma also leads to another dilemma of how long the evacuees will be called as evacuees. The truth is, the definition is blurred. The different government agencies use different definition for this evacuees. For example, the current nationwide system that we have, it requires each of the evacuees to declare his or her information to the municipality that they have evacuated to. Whereas affected municipalities in Fukushima consider based on the residence cards and their registration and people's will. So the numbers from these municipalities and number that you get at the national level is quite different. And it's natural if you imagine yourself, it's natural for people to blend in to the area where they have evacuated to. So some stopped such declaration and some just don't know that they had to declare. But this also leads to the situation where some argue that we are making these current evacuees invisible. Within Sendai framework, we're also trying to minimize the number of people being affected by disasters and try to understand the accurate picture of how many people are actually affected, I think is critical. So to how long do we call these people as evacuees? What kind of definition that we use? That's definitely a dilemma Japan is facing today. Okay, another dilemma is when to lift this emergency provision of acceptable emergency radiation dose level. So the international standard for the radiation dose level for ordinary public is 1 millisievert per year annually. Now, after the nuclear accident, this level has been increased to 20 millisievert per year as an emergency provision. And it links very much to that risk communication that the earlier speakers were talking about. And still this emergency provision of 20 millisievert per year is used to determine whether people can return to the affected areas or not. And that is actually deteriorating people's confidence of the information that they receive to return to their homeland. So people feel this anxiety over whether the risk information is properly conveyed to them or not. Now, this is also a dilemma that may link with Sendai Framework Global Target G, when we think about the effective early warning and disaster risk information. Wait. Now, no country is, of course, perfect, and there's so much to learn. After all, I always consider DRR as it's about learning from yesterday for safer tomorrow. Now, aside from what I described today in earlier slides, there's still many other dilemmas Japan is facing. For example, we still haven't figured out how to dispose the nuclear waste. There's negative public feeling around this, and it's hard to believe any municipalities will agree to become a nuclear waste disposal site. So what to do with this is a big dilemma. Also, we're trying to figure out what to do with the contaminated water at the nuclear power plant, which produces, by the way, 120 to 180 tons of contaminated water per day. It has decreased significantly. In 2014, it was producing around 540 tons of contaminated water per day. Recently, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights also expressed a concern over potential plan of discharging these contaminated water to ocean. Okay, it's a problem, but what to do with this is a big dilemma. Now, after the accident, Fukushima Prefecture is undertaking the thyroid cancer screening examination for all children who were between age 0 and 18 at the time of the accident. So far, there were over 250 cases, which is significant, of thyroid cancer, which is significantly higher than the national average. But some argue that this is due to over-screening effect, and some suggest that we may need to stop doing the screening in schools, making them sort of, because it would seem like we're forcing children to go through this screening, although it's not mandatory. So, however, some argue that without this screening, we won't really understand the health effects of the people. And some people also indicate that their anxiety will grow without such health support. And these are the words from people in Fukushima. So how to determine the health effects with the long-term screening is definitely dividing people's perception, and it's a dilemma. There are 54 nuclear power plants in Japan, and all stopped operation after the Fukushima accident in 2011. There are 9 actually power plants that are operating now, nuclear power plants. The safety standards after this Fukushima incident was strengthened to include the, thinking what to do if something goes wrong. Resuming the operation versus the safety concerns, including like evacuation planning by each municipality, is a continuous and contentious issue. So resuming the nuclear power plant recently became part of Japanese government's implementation plan on SDGs. But there's a strong sentiment against this in civil society. So I'm not saying which is right. I'm just saying that's a dilemma. Population decreasing overall, the outflow trend of the population is significantly higher in disaster-affected areas. And already, right now, there are about 1,800 municipalities in Japan, and around half of that has a potential to disappear by 2040. So the question is, the Build Back Better principles that we have in Sendai Framework, how to implement that Build Back Better in the decrease in population scenario in these sites is a big dilemma. And there are more. And as indicated, there are contentious issues, and it's hard to say which is right and which is wrong in a very simplified way. But I always believe that in these complex issues, we need to get back to the basic principles. Like when all the states have signed Sendai framework, we made it clear about the scope of this framework. So both natural man-made hazards, environmental, technological, biological hazards and risks, health resilience. Also, I really admired when our representative, Japanese government representative, declared that Japan will no longer create safety myths around nuclear power plant at the WCDR in 2015. So let me try to sum this up. So there are significant growth in NGO sector in Japan that happened in the last 10 years. And the sector is increasingly seen as partners by various government agencies and local government units as well. So that's a good sign. Now we talk about this 10 years, but 10 years may be a milestone for some of us. But these many consequences of these disasters are ongoing phenomenon. And for many who have been personally affected by that disasters, 10 years actually doesn't mean a thing. There are so many unknowns, particularly when it comes to the Fukushima situation. So it's not wise to put any conclusion at this point. And that's why when I share these issues, I prefer calling it dilemma rather than putting any conclusion to this. Exploration of understanding the risk and cascading effects needs to continue. And that, I think that's the best that we can do with the spirit that's enshrined in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction that we all try to implement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Komino-san, for your excellent presentation. There are so many points I really agree with you and the concerns you mentioned. So you also mentioned about the importance of the whole sort of the society and also stakeholders approach into the more variety of disaster types. But I think it's very challenging, including this pandemic situation right now. So what would be the important element and the point for us to implement this whole society and also the whole all disaster approach, including this pandemic issue?
Thank you very much. That's a very difficult question to answer. But I think engagement is key. So for example, the other day, we had a pleasure of discussing about sort of uplifting the disaster resilience measures for people with disabilities in Kerala, in India, for example. And the question was, okay, so we talk about these disaster management policies and disaster management process and operations at the time of disasters. But when you think about who are the stakeholders that these people with disabilities deal with before disaster, which has a significant impact on their vulnerabilities, that is one of the underlying risk factor, as Anime-san was talking about. 90% of the stakeholders before disaster are not disaster management professionals. There could be like a social workers, for example, who are not part of this disaster management discussion, policy discussion. So I think the key is to be as multi-stakeholder in the planning process, engage as many people as possible, because I think that's the only way to have the appropriate brainstorming about what needs to be done, tackling these underlying risk factors. And as Rajiv-san mentioned about the good case in Malaysia, I think trying to make it as multi-stakeholder as possible is one way to reach that.
Yeah, thank you, Komino-san. And also, you showed us the growth and also development of NPO NGOs in Japan after the 10 years. But at the same time, I heard quite a difficult situation, about the continuation of NPO's work in Japan. And what do you see that kind of difficulties and they are facing right now after 10 years?
Well, for example, many organizations have pulled out from their relief and recovery efforts for Tohoku. So I think in terms of for example, funding matters for organizations working there, it has been quite a difficult time to deal with this transition. But somehow really transitioned well in the sense that they stopped relying on the specific source of funding in the early days, and they have tried to expand their donor base so that it includes. So they try to enhance this empathy of the things that they're trying to achieve with the potential supporters in Japan, and those people, I think, that kind of strategy have led to contribute significantly to their sustainability. But it's true to say pretty much all organizations have to go through that transition, and going through that transition is not easy because it's not something that you normally do. It's not something that you get trained usually. So I think for some it has been quite a difficult time also.
Yeah. And also I think there is a big need, sort of the advocacy and also the leadership like you, who keep telling the important activities by NPO and NGOs for the people who are not really, I mean, you also showed, there are so many people who caused, impacted by the indirect, damage by disasters. So I really, have a great expectation and also looking forward to the work you and also your organizations. And I believe, for the Japanese society, we are shrinking, and that the people for local governments and government officials are decreasing. And in that kind of society, I think the role of NPOs and NGOs is getting much increased in huge. So I really looking forward to see your additional work for the future. Thank you so much, Komino-san, as usual, for your kind support and cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so that is all for today's session. And once again, I'd like to thank all the speakers for sharing their experience and knowledge related to Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami with us. Also, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who joined today's session at the commemoration of the 10th year from the Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami. I really have to apologize. I could not take all the questions given to us, but I hope some of the speakers have already answered through Q&A session, Q&A function. And we just entered another phase of the recovery from Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami, and our works for and learning from the recovery will be continued. So please be informed that the recording for today's session will be shared by email. The link will be shared by email, and also that will be uploaded on the APLU website. So please check, don't forget to check to review this video today. And the APLU Multi-Hazards Program will continue various activities in the future. And most likely, we may have to continue this online mode of our activities this year as well. And I do hope you can join other multi-hazards program and the activities in the future. And lastly but not least, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to the APLU International Secretariat that operationed this session today, and from Hong Kong, and their tremendous support to the program. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in the future multi-hazards program. Thank you so much for your participation, and